Hey everyone, how's it going? We continue exploring the terminal directive card pool. This time we swing over to the runner side where Geist is pretty happy that he has a few new shiny tools of his own. Yeah, all these cards seem to fit very well in Geist. Probably even better than in Steve Cambridge, which came with terminal directive. But today even though we'll feature all these three cards in today's playthrough, we really want to focus on one particular one, Dean Lister. This card is very similar to a previously printed security chip. There are some minor differences such as Dean Lister being influence free and being based on cards and grip instead of link, but otherwise they perform basically the same function. They have a trash can, you activate it, and it gives you plus strength for the rest of the run to a certain breaker or breakers in the case of security chip. Now, this is actually a very big deal for Geist because Geist appreciates Dean Lister's effect a lot more than Security Chip. Security Chip is rather limited because it is based on your link, and Geist doesn't have a lot of link. I mean, he has a bunch, but not like Sunny a bunch. So, not to mention that, Geist usually wants to get a big strength boost early on because that's when Geist is weakest, when they haven't installed enough breakers yet, meaning that cloud breakers are very low in strength. You really want something like Dean Lister to push you past the 5 or 6 strength threshold, which is where many of the nasty code gates and sentries are at. So yeah, very nice card, and not to mention that it synergizes with Mammon, a new breaker that came out in Terminal Directive as well. Dean Lister is amazing with AI breakers. It's not just Mammon, Faust, Ether, whatever you name it. AI breakers work very well with Dean Lister because they retain the strength till the end of the run, and you typically use AI breakers throughout the entire run. So I'm going to base this guy's deck on Mammon as the fixed breaker, as in the permanent breaker, and the cloud breakers as temporary tempo gaining breakers. We'll see how that works out in the playthrough. So we kick off this match against Palana, and I'm greeted with an opening hand of Double Peddler. As guys, you almost always want to mulligan for a tech trader, therefore I keep my opening hand because the peddlers will almost certainly draw me into my first tech trader. Now I play both peddlers and it reveals a couple of stuff including the tech trader I was looking for. That's good. I'm gonna poke R&D here because I would like a global food initiative. No, seriously, you want to get agendas early whenever possible. This allows you to close out the game a lot easier with a mad dash at the late game. Open servers are meant to be run. Come on. As long as you're not worried about hard-hitting news or any nasty mid-seasons or things like that, just run. Nothing bad can happen. Marcus Patty goes in the bin. I have Desperado, I can afford to trash these things. Jackson Howard, now this one's tricky. I have to let it go. I'm low on credits. I don't have a Temujin coming up, so I do need to save credits. And my opponent goes for a score. That looks like a Nisei that's being scored. I have the source under my first peddler, so I think I can be really cheeky with this one. Now I'm gonna draw, and I draw into one of each breaker. So I'm like, okay, this is a really interesting juncture to be. If I drop all my breakers and then stop my opponent from scoring with the source after they double advance their agenda, this was a very rude thing to do. Kids, don't do this at home. This will make your opponent rage quit. But my opponent was very polite. They stayed on and dropped a Marcus Batty in that server. Now, if I steal this 3 advanced Nisei, this would be a huge tempo swing. But instead, I'm going to go for HQ after dropping the shift here. The reason is this: I have Maxwell James in my hand and I'm going to abuse him. But first, I hit a future perfect. Goodness me. I do miss the side game, building 0 instead of 1. I drop the Maxwell James and run last click. Now, this Maxwell James is amazing. It's not like Crescentus, it's better. What it does is it allows you to, after encountering the ice, de-res it. Since you've passed the encounter stage, they cannot re-res the ice. Therefore, you don't need to break the ice. I did this because I was worried about strength 4 or higher breaker, ice, which I wouldn't be able to break. Maxwell James gave me a get out of free jail pass. So I was able to get past the Lotus Field, and now we break the Enigma, going on to the Marcus Patty. I failed the side game, I bid 2, that set me really far back. Oh, it would have been so sweet if I stole that Nisei off that run, but the side game failed and my opponent gets the Nisei. So this actually sets me back pretty far. I'm not too happy about it. At least I forced my opponent to expand the Batty on it, but no, I wasn't very happy about it at all. My opponent gets an Agroplex going, which helps me a lot. I'm able to draw extra cards, including the Dean's List that I want to see. This Dean's Lister is going to start making things really fun. But first, we need to get the tech traders down. I'm very short of money, so I'm looking at money and card draw right now as crucial stuff to have, while my opponent's setting up their draw, drawing their cards, drawing their upgrades, and agendas. I'm going to set up my triple tech trader and then bump into the R&D ice. I knew it was vanilla because I saw it off the top of R&D earlier. That way I'm able to break it with Spike. This gives me 3 credits in a draw, which I so badly need. With those extra 3 credits in a draw, I can start accelerating my game by dropping a Sports Hopper next turn. This allows me to draw a whole bunch of cards, and now I decide what to do here. With these new cards, I have a lot of options, but the one that stands out the most is the Temujin. I do need the money right now. I'm going to drop it on Archives and make a couple of runs. This brings me straight up to 10 credits. You can't argue with the Temujin Desperado interaction. Even though as guys, you probably don't want to run Temujin because you have tech traders, you probably don't want to run Desperado because you love your Forger, you really cannot argue with the sheer economic output of Temujin contracts. So yeah, now I have the money to contest the remote, but I don't have the breakers. That's a bit unfortunate. My opponent double advances an agenda there. Looks like I have to let it go. There's nothing much I can do about that. So the next best thing I can do right here is to set up the Aaron Marin, which will get 2 counters on score. My opponent scores a future perfect, putting them at match point, 5 points. So now I have to check the remote every single time. Philotic Entanglement is at risk. I now need to speed up my game, so I pop my second Sports Hopper and draw into my third one. I find the Mammon, and this is where we can start going. The Mammon allows me to break every single ice out there. So once I have this and enough money, I'll be able to do stuff. And you bet I have money. Between the Archives Temujin and all the Fall Guys I've just installed, I'm going to make things happen. My opponent attempts to score out here for the win, and I'm going to stop them right now. But first, we need to charge out the Mammon at the start of turn. I accidentally trigger it, realizing that I don't have enough money to do it. So I'm going to pop some Fall Guys here at the start of my turn before triggering Mammon. This way, I can now trigger Mammon to place a couple of power counters on it. Now, I know exactly what my opponent's ice is on the remote. Enigma into Lotus Field. I'll need 5 counters to break them. 6 actually, but I can ignore 1 subroutine on the Enigma because that's a loser click subroutine, which I ignore on my last click run. My first 2 clicks were same old Rumor Mill. It's dirty, it's nasty, no one likes the Space Kitty, but you've got to do what you got to do. I'm willing to fork out 5 influence for it if it means that I can steal the Nisei in this situation, and sure I do. I also wipe my opponent's upgrades clean off the board, and then with my final click, I go for a run on Archives to gain Temujin money. I would not have been able to contest that server with any form of reliability if it weren't for the Space Kitty. It feels very dirty, but this is how powerful the card is, like it or not. So, I'm not out of the woods just yet. Even though with Rumor Mill, it seems like I'm in an auto-win position against Polana. You must keep in mind that I am still not in the best spot because I do not have the right breakers. I don't have a lot of cloud breakers right now. I need to pre-charge the Mammon correctly if I'm going to be able to break through ice. Also, my opponent can start playing the Never Advance game here, just jamming stuff behind the Lotus Field remote. That is going to be super annoying for me to get through. I don't have that much money to break all the ice. So let's see what my opponent does here. They know that the pressure's on, so they play Fast Track to fetch a Philotic Entanglement and then do a double install. 1 install on server 1, and probably another new install? Nope, they take a credit. Okay, so I'm probably forced to check it, but I know for sure that I can get in there pretty easily. Still, I'm going to charge up to 5 counters. This is the threat of the Nisei token. My opponent saved the Nisei token, thereby forcing me to overcharge my Mammon so that I can guarantee 2 runs on the remote. After fetching some money from Archives, I go contest the remote. Here I use the Dean Lister to charge up the Mammon, putting Mammon at exactly 4 strength because Guys draws a card. This allows me to break all the ice for free. Remember, the power counters are free. And then I swing over to R&D to expend the rest of my Mammon counters, fetching me a Nisei Mark II, putting me at 6 points. Note that Mad Dash is not very useful in this matchup because my opponent can easily stop my Mad Dash using the Nisei counter, and I don't really want to take the meat damage. It should be noted that I did see the Nisei Mark II off the spy cam. This is why I was able to run R&D and steal it. Now my opponent continues the rejamming shell game, placing a new remote and another new remote, and fortifying the first remote with a new piece of ice. Now I'm really rich. I think I can contest this, but boy is this going to be hard. Okay, again, I need to charge the Mammon such that I can make 2 runs through it, and I have to estimate how many subroutines the outermost ice has. Assuming the outermost ice has 1 subroutine, I can make it through with 7 Mammon counters. Let's go for it. First, I'll check the naked remote to ensure that my opponent isn't playing any switch and bait tricks. Then I drop the D-lister and then go for 2 runs. I see a DNA tracker. It's time for some intense mathematical calculations. Now, I can clearly bust the D-lister. I have so many cards in hand, I can easily get my Mammon up to strength and break everything for 1 run. The problem is, this will expend 6 of my 7 Mammon counters, so this is immediately infeasible. What I need to do is to compute backwards, assuming my opponent uses the Nisei Mark II token to end the run because it's a Philotic at the end of the server, which wins both of us the game. I need to save enough Mammon counters to get past the server a second time. That number is 2. I need 2 counters to get past the 2 end the run subroutines on that server. I can let DNA Tracker fire as many times as I wish because I have enough cards in hand to tank it. So the correct answer here is to spend 5 counters on this first run, which means after distributing all the Mammon counters, I would take 1 DNA Tracker subroutine to the face. This is very rare that you take a partial DNA Tracker subroutine. I mean, yeah, you let the DNA Tracker partially resolve, but I'm going to do that here after triggering Dean Lister. And then we proceed through the server. I break the Lotus Field, and then I break the Enigma. Will my opponent use the Nisei counter? Are they? No, it's a bait. I got tricked. It's a Jackson Howard. Okay, so obviously I trash the Jackson Howard. And then since I have 2 Mammon counters remaining, I might as well do a run on HQ right now. I'm going to lose a lot of cards from hand, which is quite a pain. Enigma is there, so I'm going to break it. And let's see what's in HQ, a Vanilla and a Chrysium Grid. Do I trash the Chrysium here? I think I do. I know I have a Siphon in deck, so once I draw the Siphon, which happens to be the final card in my deck it seems, I will be able to Siphon lock my opponent and hopefully win off centrals. I don't really want to be dragged through this DNA Tracker server too many times, given that I'm running out of cards and I don't have Levy Recursion. I do not have the tempo right now to play Levy. This would send me back pretty far. So I'm strongly considering the Sneak Door here. But it's tough. My opponent jammed another item in a remote, so I'm forced to check it. Or am I? They are now on 2 credits because they spent all their money rezzing ice. So I can actually afford to let them get away with this one. Instead, I go for a Sneak Door and I see a Future Perfect. Okay, so I know there's an agenda in hand. My opponent spent all 2 credits to prevent me from stealing it. If I hit it again this turn, I would win the game, but nope, I missed the Future Perfect. So you notice that I did not draw the last turn. This is to avoid triggering the Polana ability. I do not want to draw because if I draw, they will go up to 3 credits and that will allow them to score the Philotic that could be in server 1. This applies to this turn as well. I cannot draw the last card in my deck even though I know it's the account siphon that I need. I would rather stick to my guns and try to do something else. Something else being clicking for credits so that I can get past the ice on server 1 ultimately. My opponent resists the Agroplex and gives me my free draw, but it turns out that's not the siphon I was looking for. It's a spike. I check my bin only to confirm that I forgot to put the siphons in my deck. What an idiot. What a blithering idiot. Well, how am I going to win this game then? My opponent's on 4 credits. They have a Philotic, or what seems like a Philotic in the server. How am I going to get through? I can't. This is do or die. I need to get through this turn or I'm going to lose. Now, I know that there's a Future Perfect somewhere in hand, but it could also be in the bin. There's a reason why my opponent put an upgrade on archives, and that is something I want to investigate. I can always use the remaining clicks to contest the server, so I'm going to try to load up Mammon with 4 counters and try to sneak door 4 times for the win. But my plans will stop cold when, after sneak dooring, my opponent reveals the Chrysium on archives. This forces me to make successful run on archives instead, thereby preventing me from accessing HQ. Now, again, I'm buying myself time. My opponent cannot score out this turn, but what do I do with my remaining clicks? I don't have to contest the remote right now, but I know the future perfect I'm looking for is in his hand. So I'm going to run HQ twice here, the first time with a crowbar. And let's see if I get lucky. If I hit the future perfect, nope, I hit a Jackson. If I trash it here, I will have a higher chance of hitting the future perfect on the next run. So I do trash it, and I run HQ one more time, paying with Mammon, breaking one subroutine, and getting access. Let's see the future perfect. It's a 50-50 shot for me to win the side game if I hit the future perfect. But my opponent's thinking of expanding the Nisei counter right here. Seems like they don't need it for the remote anymore. I brought myself down to 2 credits. Breaking with Mammon is super expensive. I spent all my money trashing Jackson, running through vanilla, charging my Mammon. I'm out of money. My opponent can safely use the Nisei counter here, knowing that I do not have any way of getting through a DNA Tracker Lotus Field Enigma server. This is starting to look very bad. What seemed like a dominant start from me is now, the game is now slipping away from my hands very, very quickly. Turn after turn, I've managed to tread water to prevent my opponent from triple advancing the item in the remote, but now it's crunch time. I can't avoid this any longer. It's do or die. What do I do this turn? Can you help me get out of this sticky situation? Pause the video if you have an idea of what you want, what I can do. Yeah, so it's very hard. 5 agendas in the scoring area. There are probably 3 more left given the agenda suite. If my opponent's running future perfect, they're probably on the 8 agenda suite. So I realized that contesting the server is almost impossible here. So what I do instead is to go for the levy. A very questionable decision, but I needed to refresh the cards so that I could possibly draw into better stuff. I then hit R&D, which allows me to draw more and gain more money. And here is where I realized I made a fatal error. Let's rewind the video and reanalyze this situation. This was where we were at. First click was spent playing levy. We now have 3 clicks remaining and a single credit to our name. The objective is to successfully hit what seems to be the Philotic at the base of server 1. Don't forget, my opponent had already expended the Nisei counter earlier last turn. Is it actually possible for me to get through this nasty code gate server? Pause the video to think about it. I'll review the solution shortly. Okay, so what most people don't really realize is that unlike Tollbooth, DNA Tracker can actually be Hail Married through. It is completely fine to run through DNA Tracker, especially if you have the cards to tank it. The main problem that most runners face when up against a DNA Tracker is that they cannot continue past the DNA Tracker because it is very likely that the DNA Tracker would sap all their credits from them, rendering them unable to use the icebreakers to break any further ice. However, Geist does not suffer from this problem because he runs tech traders and has paid ability windows with which to pop stuff. So on encounter with the Lotus Field, I could have used the crowbar in my hand. Of course, I'll install it first at click 2. On click 3, I would then run. I would not lose any credits because I would be on 0 credits then. Then I hit the Lotus Field, I'll use the crowbar. It being on 4 strength, I would be able to break it. And then that gives me 3 credits with which I can use Mammon to finish off the Enigma. That was my out, and I failed to see it. Instead, I ran R&D, which cost me the game. This removed 1 breaker from the table, which rendered me unable to use the crowbar to then pry my way through the Lotus Field. What a big mistake. Instead of securing the assured victory on the remote, I instead decided to play roulette with centrals. Busting my way through R&D, one that has very low agenda density by now, and then forcing my way through HQ a couple of times to find the future perfect I missed the last time. That was never really gonna work out. I give it a valiant attempt here, but ultimately it was not to be. I do not find a winning agenda. So, did you discover the solution to getting into server 1? I bet many of you did. It was pretty obvious. I'm actually very disappointed that I wasn't able to see that play myself, because that would have been such an amazing way to end this game. But instead, I ended up handing my opponent the victory. Very well played to my opponent. In spite of their win condition being completely blanked out by Rumor Mill, they were able to subdue me with their superior play. Which goes to show that you can jam all the hate cards in your deck and still be a shit player. On the other hand, the mark of a truly good player is one who can adapt to the situation and play well against even the worst of hate cards. Anyway, my horrendous gameplay aside, let's move on to talking about Dean Lister as a card, analysing it in the context of the game, and talking about its place in a guy's deck. So, this game, that one Dean Lister that got me through the DNA tracker remote actually saved me 12 whole credits. 3 Mammon Pumps on DNA Tracker, 2 Mammon Pumps on Lotus Field, 1 Mammon Pump on Enigma. The fact that it retains its strength till the end of the run makes it a very, very potent card against Glacier decks. Not to mention that it has a trash can as well, giving you Tech Trader and Geist triggers. It is an amazing card, especially against Glacier decks as mentioned. Not only that, it also is able to get through early gear checks in a pinch. Now, this game did not illustrate that exactly, but if you recall the instance where I managed to use Maxwell James to bypass Lotus Field, or rather de-res it and run through, if I had a Dean Lister in that position, I could have done the same thing, because I would be able to pump my crowbar above 4 strength, which would allow me to break the Lotus Field. Of course, Maxwell James was superior in that situation because I only had one crowbar. If I drew the Dean Lister instead of the Maxwell James, I would not have been able to get past the Enigma, which was the innermost piece of ice, which was also a code gate. But still something very important to note, even though Dean Lister is very synergistic with Mammon, don't forget that it can be used on Cloud Breakers as well to get you through in a pinch. Some questionable questions for deck building. How good is Dean Lister exactly in a non-AI Geist deck? You are losing out on the Mammons, even though you are able to get yourself through early gear checks as mentioned earlier on. It's not that good with regular breakers because corps don't typically stack the same type of ice on a server. They could do that against guys, but I guess that's a good reason to run Dean Lister to punish those corps who attempt to stack ice in an attempt to mitigate the effect of Cloud Breakers. Another important question to consider is whether you run 2 or 3 copies of Dean Lister. This is not a card that you want to see very early on because it costs 2 to install, which is pretty significant for a deck that doesn't run Gamble. It also doesn't really do that much, and you don't want it in multiples. Not to mention that Geist decks already saturate the deck with lots of icebreakers. If you're running the entire Cloud Breaker suite, that's 9 breakers already. Add on your AI breakers, your fixed breakers, and if you count Dean Lister, that's a lot of deck slots. And if you're running Spy Cam as well, your deck is completely bloated. This is a big problem. You don't have enough deck slots to fix your other matchups like Acid Spam or Mid-Season's Kill, for example. Okay, I guess you're not that vulnerable to kill, but you get my point. There are lots of decks out there nowadays, and you need some tech cards to deal with some of them. Finally, one saving point for Dean Lister is that this particular game, I really wish I had a 3rd copy. I ran only 2 copies, and I really could have used one more when my opponent kept trying to drag me through the DNA Tracker remote. That would have made my life so much easier. Well, hopefully you've learned more about this particular card. It's been really interesting covering it, and I hope you enjoyed this coverage of Guys. I'm sure you'll see some resurgence now that Glacier decks are more common. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy net running. I'll see you around.